Robert Schenkkan. You are one of the writers of Hacksaw Ridge, which has become quite a sensation over the last few weeks. It's doing very well at the box office, and it's starting to gain some traction with awards groups. I want to go back to the beginning of your involvement, though. This has had a very long and difficult history in getting made. Talk us through how you became involved in the project.
I became involved in 2006, so 10 years ago. Bill Mechanic, the producer, and David Permute approached me. They had just acquired the rights, which Desmond Doss had zealously guarded all these years. Hollywood had approached him numerous times to try to get the film rights, and he'd always turned it down. In fact, they even sent Audie Murphy, America's most decorated combat veteran, and eventually a movie star in his own right, to try to talk him out of it, and he couldn't. So when he did finally relinquish the rights shortly before he died, Bill approached me about writing a screenplay. I knew nothing about Desmond Doss, and so they sent me this black and white documentary, and I was just knocked out, as is everybody, by this story, and said yes immediately. And we thought it was going to happen really fast. I wrote a very strong first draft, and we began to get a lot of interest from directing talent as well as actors. And the challenge was, the problem was, the studio that we were set up with was insistent that this had to be a PG-13 movie, and a hard PG-13. And these directors, and we're talking A-list directors, would hear that and say, well, how do I shoot Okinawa like that? You can't. And so it's immensely frustrating, the numbers of people that we had going through. And eventually, to their credit, to the producer's credit, they hung in there. And Mel Gibson, who had always been my first choice, when Bill approached me and asked who I thought should direct this, I said Mel Gibson. And he read a draft of mine and came on board, and Bill was able to get the rights away from the studio at the time and set this up in play. So that's how I came to this, and then that's where I unfortunately left it, because by that time, just as they were about to start pre-production, I was in pre-production on All the Way, my movie for HBO, co-executive producing with Steven Spielberg and Bryan Cranston. I just couldn't leave. And fortunately, they reached out to Andrew Knight and brought him on board. And boy, am I glad they did a great job. A very satisfying experience after a very long time.
Yeah, and speaking of Andrew, we were meant to have him join us today, and unfortunately he had a few technical problems and he's having trouble with his computer, but he can be here in spirit.
He will be here in spirit, and if he wasn't having trouble with his computer, it might just be that he was too busy on his next project. Andrew stays with us.
Exactly, he's a very hard worker, and we appreciate. For anyone who doesn't know Andrew Knight, any Australians would know him very well. He's like a living legend here in Australia, and so I'm sure he did add a lot of value to the screenplay that you worked on. I want to move now to something that you've touched on, and that is Mel Gibson. So he became involved in this project. It's so firmly now become a Mel Gibson film, where when you see it, it has those cornerstones of what you would expect to see from a Mel Gibson movie. Talk us through working with Mel Gibson, the legendary Mel Gibson.
Well, Mel is, whatever his reputation is, he's an absolute professional and a really charming guy, very charismatic and extremely knowledgeable. Mel is a movie star in his own right as an actor, a very accomplished director, and he's an excellent screenwriter. So to work with him as a screenwriter is actually very easy, because he's absolutely conversant with the vocabulary. You're able to talk to one another and get right to the heart of whatever it is you're trying to solve in the moment. So I found Mel nothing but generous and imaginative and demanding in the best kind of way. It was a great experience.
And what would you say was the most challenging part of writing this script? Like, was there a particular scene or particular character or something that you struggled with the most?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the challenge with a character like this, with Desmond Doss, is that the temptation would be to write him as a secular saint, that it was all divinely inspired and orchestrated, and he was just along for the ride. And that's just not very interesting, A. And B, I don't think it's true. I think, in fact, it does a considerable disservice to what he actually achieved. So my job, and I think the part of the challenge here, was to bring out the very human, doubt-ridden quality of this individual. And the way that I approached by taking this one aspect of Desmond Doss's considerable idiosyncrasies, which was his refusal to touch a gun. That actually has nothing to do with his religion, nothing to do with his faith, nothing to do with Seventh-day Adventism. It's just Doss, and I made a kind of mystery out of that. It arrives somewhat late in the first act when he arrives in an induction at the barracks and makes this startling announcement, and then whenever he's pressed about it, he doesn't ever really answer the question. And so it's not until well into the second act, at the end of the first horrific day of combat on Hacksaw Ridge, when he's in a foxhole with Smitty, who has been his tormentor, his principal bully in the barracks, but over the course of this terrible, terrible day, they've clocked each other working and are prepared to accept that maybe they've underestimated this guy. And it's a scene I'm very, very proud of. It's a lovely scene between the two men as they kind of let their guard down and begin to get to know each other, each sharing a little bit about their surprising background. And then Desmond explains why he doesn't carry a gun. And it's not, as Smitty or the audience would think, because of a religious reason. It's not out of a sense of superiority. It's because Desmond is all too afraid of his own instinct to violence. That's a great contradiction for a man who is famous for his pacifism or his nonviolence. And it makes him very human. It makes us able to relate to this man and to appreciate the extraordinary willpower that he then exercises to keep himself from his own violence. So that would be the answer to that.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's 100% perfect, I think, in terms of the way that we describe this really complicated guy, that it takes us a while to understand his motivations, but by the end of it, I know for myself, I was really kind of wrapped up in that whole aspect of the film, and many commentators have really admired the visceral nature of the film, and it's very, very, it's gory and it's very impactful, and all the war scenes are beautifully done. But for many of us, it was more that emotional side of the film it really resonates. And I want to know, as a writer, it must be difficult to write emotional scenes to elicit that kind of response from an audience. But I'm wondering, what do you take into consideration, or what do you do to try to get to that result, that outcome?
Well, I think the challenge is to not overdo it, is to not sentimentalize this experience, which would be very easy to do. And that's always the trap. And so it's a kind of less is more, suggest, give us a glimpse, let us sense the yearning, let us sense the fear or the anxiety, rather than lay it out and make it obvious. The film is unusual as a screenplay and as an adaptation. It's actually quite unusual. It's really a 2-act structure. Most films are 3 acts.
Yeah.
And the first act, and a number of people have commented on this, and this is intentional. the first act has this kind of bucolic, sort of almost 1940s movie itself, as though it had been shot in the 40s.
Right.
And you're really drawn in emotionally into this small southern town, Desmond's family, his seriously PTSD-ridden father, and then this courtship to this extraordinary woman, and then we just rocket him and the audience by extension into the carnal house of Hacksaw Ridge, and that's intentional. It's meant to shock the audience, meant to kind of stun them and overwhelm them, having begun by sort of luring them in, giving them this kind of bucolic, pastoral setting, and then suddenly we're in Okinawa in the middle of this horrific battle. And all of that is very intentional and meant to really provoke the most kind of profound shock and awe Greek response to the terror and horror of that battle.
Yeah, it was that jolt was very successfully done, and it really that's probably one of the reasons why the last or the second act is so powerful, because we're not lulled is the wrong word, but we were comfortable and kind of drawn in, and then we were slapped across the face. And that's pretty cool to be able to do that to audiences. That's what we pay for. But obviously the film's become quite successful, which is a lovely ending to what has been a very difficult journey for the film, and now it's starting to actually win and receive recognition by various awards groups. So it's cleaned up in terms of nominations and in Australia at the actors, and that's in a few days, and it'll most likely win a few of those. The National Board of Review has given it notice. The Critics' Choice have given it a bunch of nominations, including for Mel. So it's doing quite well there. And this is where I'm leading. You have a lot of experience with awards. You've won a Tony, and you've been nominated, and you've won various awards at the Emmys and so forth. What does it mean to you personally to receive awards like that? And also, what does it mean to the project?
Well, it's great for the project, of course. Audiences do pay attention to that. A significant award in one of these major categories, Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Screenplay, always results in a bump in the box office. It means more attention. It means longevity. It means a bigger audience. So you're always hopeful from the pure marketing sense that happens. But also, film is an act is a really complete act of love and submission. You put yourself on the line. You spend, as I did in this case, 10 years on a project, and the recognition of not just the effort but the achievement is meaningful. It's meaningful. I mean, I'm not one of those who says, "Oh, I don't care. I don't pay any attention." I do, particularly. Awards that are more peer-driven, those are especially significant, I think. But this is a small group of us doing this. Every year. There's just a certain number of these movies get made. It's a miracle that each one gets made. Who can explain why one does and one doesn't? And it's very gratifying then to be acknowledged the way we have been, and hopefully will continue to be throughout the award season.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Hacksaw Ridge, it was predominantly made in Australia. It has an Australian director and a crew and mostly Australian cast. And I'm wondering how you felt about that particular angle. It was done that way for various reasons, maybe organically over the years. But what were your thoughts about making this film down under as opposed to in the US?
Hey, listen, as so often is the case, it's economics that drives a location production decision. In this instance, the Australian film community is so deep and so talented. You're really in good hands, and clearly we were. So there was certainly no, never begrudged the notion of shooting in Australia as opposed to Okinawa or the United States. You know, the the acting ensemble that was assembled, the amazing technical effects that were created, and what was, and it needs to be acknowledged publicly, a very, very tight production schedule and a shockingly tight budget. You know, I think this budget came in at about a half of what Mel shot Braveheart for, and that was, what, 20 years ago. And that was all possible because you had really professional people working at the height of their powers, working together very, very well. And to that, you know, a lot of tribute has to go to Mel because he's such a great general on the set. He really knows how to get the best out of everybody.
Yeah,
Makes it fun, makes it exciting, makes the challenge one you want to embrace. So I felt great about it being in Australia. And it looks fantastic.
it does. Final question, so I can let you go. Now, obviously, you've had a lot of experience over your career with writing something. So you're one of the first people to kind of come up with the concept. You write it, it then gets made and gets post production, and then it finally comes out. And so when you're sitting in the cinema or the screening room or wherever, and you finally get to see the finished product, like you did for Hacksaw, what is your reaction when you know, wow, this turned out perfectly? It's exactly what I wanted to see, and I loved it. What was your reaction for this one? Was it an emotional experience?
It was thrilling. It was thrilling. You know, the first time I saw the film completely put together was in Venice at the film festival.
Yeah. Wow.
So
really?
we're all sitting in the back, Mel and the actors and myself, and it's a big theater on the Lido, and the film concludes, and the audience stands up and applauds for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And they turn so they're facing us and applauding.
Oh,
and eventually we all just instinctively walked down from the rear of the theater to embrace and shake hands and just have this human moment with each other. And I have to tell you, it was just so moving, completely unexpected. It's certainly something that you hoped you haven't achieved, you know, but until you're really there and living it, really, really extraordinary. I tell people now that 10 minutes of applause or 1 minute for each year I spent on this movie. So.
Wow, that's brilliant. That's so gratifying. You know what, mate? I hope you get to experience more applause and more arenas where people are enjoying this film, perhaps in some awards ceremonies. And we really wish you all the best and good luck. And thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure. Pleasure talking to you again. Bye-bye.